is he talking about? What's that mean? Uh, what he's talking about, according to what I have read, was they would realize eventually that their condition was very serious, and and they would realize that they were lost. And just like the rich young ruler, when it comes to Jesus, what was the cure that Jesus gave to him for his situation? Sell all that you have and give to the poor. Now, can you imagine walking up to somebody like Mark Cuban or one of those billionaires and say, "You need to sell everything you've got, take all your money, and give it to the poor people"? Well, they would weep and howl, I guarantee you. They'd have to give up some jets and all that sort of thing. So, James, he kind of seems to turn aside from denouncing the rich, and he declares their ultimate doom. But then he goes on and to another situation. He tells them that, he says, "You've heaped up treasures in the last days," and they had. And I never, when I was a kid, I never knew. We never knew anybody that was rich. That wasn't those weren't the people that my family associated with until I guess I was in high school, and my dad was working for a company. It was owned by a man that was quite wealthy, and I knew him, and I knew his son-in-law, and they were good people. But I rather suspect that if one of us had been in great need and gone to them and asked them for help, they would have said no. And so, when you have the ability to help others, then you're supposed to do that. That's just what God teaches us to do. And what a blessing it is when someone is really in need and you're able to help them. And I think a lot of times people think, well, I don't have the ability to help anybody. When somebody is really in need, a $10 bill looks pretty good to them. And we've helped a lot of people in our congregation over the years when they're in dire need. Then we're willing to do that, and it's a blessing because it's not our money. And I think that's the problem a lot of people have is that, well, I'm not giving them my money. It ain't your money, it's God's. He's just letting you use it for a while. He wants you to use it right. And so I think it falls back just on our attitudes. That's why he says your gold and your silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. And of course, these phrases that these writers use, they're not always literal. They sometimes have dual meanings. But if you went to the rich man that is in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus and asked him if he understood what that meant, he'd say, "Yeah, I sure do. I sure do. I'm in torment." And so James is just giving some plain common advice. And then the next thing that he says that is you have to, all these things that we read about here, you have to put them into perspective. If you went to, I've got to think about this. I always say Paraguay, and now then, since they're in the World Cup, it's Paraguay or something. Troy could say it. Now that don't sound. It sounds Paraguay. Is what it sounds like to me. But anyway, I think about that because you go to a country like that, and those people, there is a tremendous need, and they can't go down to some place and apply for a job because there aren't any jobs. They have to manually, physically labor, figure some way to make money. And so when I think about that, and I think, these individuals, those that have the ability, they need to do it because he says you've heaped up treasure in the last days. And we all have to have some reserves because you don't know when you're going to need some things done. But when I think about people like Mark Cuban, and I remember back whenever he first bought the Mavericks, Lance and I and another guy went to see one of the games, and I met Mark Cuban, and he seemed just like an ordinary guy. But he nowadays, I think he's a billionaire now. And I wonder if you went sit down and ask him, why do you need so much money? He probably couldn't give you an answer, but he wants more, and that's the way it is. And so, you know, I think that as James is giving this advice, he's just giving some common sense information for these people to think about. He says, "You heap treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mow your fields, which you kept back." And we've got to remember, the one of the political candidates is making some statements right now that are just so foolish, so ignorant. He went to seminary in a denomination. Well, I'll tell you, Presbyterian seminary. And I thought, if you learn that in that seminary, then they need to do something besides trying to teach people scriptures. But the last days are now. They're not in the future. They're now. And if you ask these people what are you going to do with that money, they wouldn't be able to tell you anything sensible. And indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, you kept back. And so many times you'll read people that are very wealthy that have businesses. They're the ones that are least likely to financially support their workers well. And so James is just kind of giving a commentary on that day and our day as well. He says, "The cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabbath." If you have a child and you fail to provide for that child, feed the child, clothe the child, take care of the child, what would your opinion be of a person like that? Wouldn't be very good, would it? We've got a responsibility to help those who need help. And if these workers come and are doing the work and you know, serving the owners like they should, then they should be supported, and they shouldn't have to ever fear not getting the money that's due to them. And so James is just really hitting these situations extremely hard. He tells those people that did that, "You've lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, and you fatten your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the just. He does not resist you." And so, again, when I think about these things, I think that try to put in perspective in our day, because back in that day things would have been different, but the end result's the same. We just need to be certain that we are generous and beneficial to others. And then he goes on into the next part. He says, "Be patient and persevering." By the way, the weeping and howling, that was one thing I wanted to point out. A lot of the scholars think that the weeping and howling and the miseries coming upon them was a reference to the conditions that the rich, unbelieving Jews were suffering when the armies of Titus came in and destroyed Jerusalem. You know, if you don't have anything, I've thought about this so many times. If you don't have anything, and you lose your home or whatever, it's horrible. But people that have lived without can do a whole lot better than those who have lived in luxury. If you took people that lived in luxury, have these beautiful mansions and all these fancy cars and taking all these trips all over the world and all that, and they lose that, but they can't survive. Who's going to mow my yard? They might say, you know, if it's just sad. So the poor suffered, and their suffering was intense, but those who had lived in luxury, I think it was more difficult for them to survive. And I want to point this out also, because I think that I don't want to ever think someone understands me by saying that having money is a sin. It's not. Not having money is not a sin. It's all in the attitude of the one who has or doesn't have. And about the fine garments of the rich, he said they are moth-eaten. Uh, you know, it's always amazed me how that clothing is looked upon by those who have the fancy clothes as making them better than someone else. For years, we didn't have money. I mean, working for the church, I wasn't well paid. Didn't really ask for it. So I'd go down to Goodwill and find suits. And there's a couple of places that we knew of where there were wealthy families living in the area, and they just delighted in taking their clothing down there to Goodwill and donating it. And I didn't mind wearing it. And I could open my jacket up, and there'd be a name brand in there. I didn't buy it. I'm not going to go pay $500 for a suit, but somebody did, and I don't mind wearing theirs. And so, but the attitude of I'm better than you are because I have better clothes, that's just the most ignorant thought in the world to me. That doesn't mean anything to me. I think we need to realize that riches or material things don't make the person. That's not the way that it's set up. He said, in verse 7, he talks about the brethren. Therefore be patient, brethren. And, when I read that verse the other day, there's some passages in the Bible. I know it's not this way, but there's some passages in the Bible I feel like that God knew I was going to be here one of these days, and he needed to write it just for me, because I have such a problem with patience. I used to have some, but I've lost it so much I have never found it. So it's just sad that we're that way. But he says, "Be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord." And so that's what we have to understand, that if things aren't working right, in most cases it really doesn't matter. It'll be fine. My father-in-law, his favorite saying was, 1,000 years from now, nobody will know. It won't make any difference. And that's true. It just things that upset me and bother me and worry me 15 or 20 years ago, I don't even know what they are. And so we have to just realize that we have to trust it in the Lord. Now, one of the things that James points out, though, he's talking about the wages crying out. That's a literary tool that we're familiar with called personification. So he's giving those stolen wages a voice, and I think a lot of times you'll see that. But when he goes to the brethren and tells them to be patient, he assured them of some things. He assured them that there were benefits in doing that. There were benefits in being patient. We had a lady that came to church here a long time ago. She lived, I think, in Springtown or Racel somewhere. And I used to wonder, why are you coming over here when you live over there? Well, I found out. She told Lance when she came that she had suffered a heart attack not too many months earlier. And you didn't have to ask her why, because she was going to tell you next. She had a heart attack because she got so angry and upset about things in her business and whatever. And it actually affected her that way. So she had a heart attack. Well, when she came over here and I found that out, I thought, well, I wonder when the next one's going to happen. Well, it didn't happen while she was here, but it wasn't because she behaved herself either. So I was kind of glad when she decided that we didn't meet her needs, because I don't know how you do that with people like that. But James says, just be patient until the coming of the Lord. And I think in that particular phrase, he's not talking about the end times. When I read that, I thought about this a lot. Without the presence of God in your life, all sorts of things are going to bother you and worry you. because you're carrying it all yourself. That's why Jesus taught us to give the load to him. Just hand it to him, and he'll take care of it. And so James gives some examples. See, the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth. You don't go plant a crop and the next morning get your tractor ready to go out and harvest it. It takes time. He said, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. And that's why when people first become Christians, it's so important for them to understand, just because they become a Christian, just because they decide that they want to put their lives in God's hands and they're baptized or whatever, it doesn't mean all the problems are going to disappear. As a matter of fact, those same problems are still going to be there, and they might even intensify because the devil's going to attack them. And so James says, just wait. And that's what, when I thought about Richard Brandon this morning, when Lance first told us about his cancer, and it didn't sound good at all. And I started praying. We prayed. Well, I didn't go, the next day or two and get on Facebook and text him and say, Richard, how you feeling? We prayed for you last night. It takes a while. And I think God does it. God can do it instantaneously. But I think he wants us to just understand that we've got to really learn how to give it to him and turn it over and forget about it. Just forget about it. Because he's going to fix it in whatever way is best for us. And he doesn't need our advice. James was assured these faithful Christians there were benefits in waiting on him. And the word patient in the Bible is used two different ways. One way it's used as being patient with people, and the other way it's used as being patient with the trials of life. Now, the trials of life don't bother me so much. It's just the people that do, And so we have to learn to be patient with them. And I thought about this so many times. I thought, talking to people about that. Well, I would be if they weren't so stupid. I am too. And we all are. We say things, we do things that just make no sense at all. They do to us, but not to anybody else. I think, when we wake up in the morning and God looks at us, I just wonder if he shakes his head, I wonder what they're going to do today. Oh, my. The Lord gives us some tools that we can put a lot of confidence in, and he did with these brethren. When I see the traffic after school that's out in Poolville, there's one young man. I know he comes from the high school, and he would come. I could hear him 5 minutes before he got here, and I knew he'd come down this corner and he'd turn, and he would see how fast he could go before he got to the curve here. And I thought, Lord, I wish something would change that guy's attitude. Well, it did. Because one day I was out there and I heard him, and he got up probably up there close to the post office, and his engine blew up. And I heard it. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say, thank you, Lord. I just tried to keep my mind and my thoughts to myself, because God takes care of those. And he does. He'll take care of those situations. And rather than for us to upset ourselves and so on and so forth, we just need to do what James says and just be patient. Just be patient. In the next verse, verse 9, he said, do not grumble against one another. And someone might read the first part of that and say, well, I can if I want to. But they need to read the next part. He said, lest you be condemned. And, I'm thankful that we don't live in a world where everybody's personality is exactly the same. It would be a dull world if we all were the same. this guy that used to come to church here was a very successful man and did well for himself. But if he ever smiled, I mean, I think if he'd smiled, his face would have broke. You know, I mean, he didn't know how to smile. He didn't know how to be happy. But he was a multi-millionaire. And so when I think about this, when he said, James says, don't grumble against one another, lest you be condemned, I think about that because that man he had the ability to aggravate me easily, put it that way. And I never said anything to him about it, but I just thought, I wish you wouldn't be like that. I mean, you couldn't have a conversation with him. If I went up to him and I said, I think that this suit is gray, he probably would have said, I think it's blue. I mean, he loved to say things like that. But if you disagreed with him, he did not know how to interchange, go back and forth. He couldn't do that. If he came in and said, I've got a blue suit, no, Marvin, that's a brown suit. I've got a blue suit. It's brown. I've got a blue suit. That's how he was a strength. But the guy was a good Christian man. He was here every time the doors opened, and a faithful contributor to the Lord's work. So when I think about murmuring against each other, James says, just don't do that. And then he says something else. He says, lest you be condemned. And so this attitude, well, I've got the right to say what I want to. Well, you can say what you want to, but God is going to be the judge. You got to think about that. And so when we have words come out of our mouths, and I know that it's kind of foolish to try to think of us doing this quickly, but before we say them, we need to think about them. And even as they come out of our mouths, we better make sure if we still have the ability, we better amend them. Because, you know, it's kind of like that old joke with the wife coming into the husband and saying, honey, does this dress make me look fat? And he says, no, it doesn't make that. The dress doesn't. You know, that sort of thing. You got to think about what you're saying. That's what I'm trying to point out. And then he says the judge is standing at the door. And so every time, and I have to fight this. I really do. I've got to always remember that I'm responsible for everything that I think, everything that I say, and everything that I do, because the judge is standing at the door. And sadly, there are times when we don't get do-overs because we say something or we do something that upsets somebody or offends somebody, and then, you know, we've lost a friendship or we lost a church member, and I don't want to see that. And when people on the other side of the fence, there are those that take offense so easily or look for reasons to blame someone for their own problems, and that's wrong too. And I don't know, I think that the lessons that I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years here are so beneficial, because I can honestly say that I don't know anyone in our congregation that has these problems that I've just discussed. I don't know what's in your mind. I don't really care. That's your business. But the people here are so congenial. They go out of their way to help each other and treat each other right. And that's what God is looking for. To murmur means to pass judgment of an adverse character upon others. And James says when you do that, you're judging others. And that judging others is such a difficult thing to try to get people to understand. For example, I saw where the political candidate at the church that he is associated with had a gay rights flag draped across the American flag. Well, I have the right in my own heart and mind to say that's wrong. That's wrong. Now, if I said that to some people, they said, "Why are you judging them?" Well, I'm not. Actually, God is. Because God says that's a sin. But if you just had a personal preference type thing, then I've got to be careful with that. because I don't have the right to, and the judging he's talking about here is where we say, I hope they burn in hell. That's really what he's saying. And I don't have the right to do that. I don't have the right to have those kind of thoughts. So we have to be careful with the way that we look, because Jesus said, judge not. What's the rest of it? That you be not judged. So I try to think of that like an accountant. You know, I've got debits and I've got credits. I want to make sure that one side doesn't get too heavy. You know, I want to make sure that things are balanced with God. That He looks at me and says, yeah, you messed up a bunch, but you also took care of it because you repented, you followed, you changed, and so on and so forth. Then another thing that he says there in verse 12, he says, but above all, brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath. And I see and I hear so many times people doing this. And you know what, if somebody asks me a question, and it's a yes or no situation, and I say no, I've answered the question. I don't have to say anything else. Or if I say yes, I don't have to add anything to it. But there are some people that they've got to add a bunch of swear words to those words. And I think, you know, you're so foolish. Why do you think that that's changing anything? All I asked you for was a yes or no answer, period. That's all I needed. But I imagine that a lot of us have been guilty of doing that before. And I think that what James is saying to us, you know, we don't judge people. We're not supposed to do that. But if I'm around someone that uses those types of words, my opinion of them is lower. And I think that's probably, I don't know if that's a sin or not. I have to think about that. But we want to be a representative of Christ. And so I asked myself, how would Jesus answer this question? How would he respond to this? And sadly, a lot of times I fail the test. When he makes that statement, yet your yes be yes and your no be no, I want to say one other thing before I quit, and I'll have the last part of it. We'll have to get that next time. But there's James, or someone, I guess it's Paul, that teaches this. He says, we need to always understand if it's the Lord's will, this or that'll happen. And I've known people before that everything they say, I'm going to go to the grocery store tomorrow if it's the Lord's will. I'm going to mow the grass tomorrow if it's the Lord's will. I understand what they're saying, but that's not what the scriptures are teaching. What they're teaching is that needs to be in our hearts. We don't have to verbalize that every time. We need to understand that whatever happens in our lives is directed by God. And we can modify that by our behavior, or by our attitudes. But basically, we ought to just live our lives with the understanding that everything that happens, it's under God's power, God's will. The Bible talks about we don't want to incur the wrath of God. So our behavior needs to be such that we don't incur His wrath. And it needs to be such so that we are receive the blessings. And we can change that by the way that we act and talk and live our lives. Okay, thank you all.